Looking to break into or advance your career in cybercrime and cybersecurity? Apply now with a master's degree of cybercrime and digital investigation from Michigan State University. Experience a nationally ranked program taught by world-renowned researchers and practitioners that can help you play a role in combating cybercrime and advance justice for victims. Designed to be completed in as little as 2 years and in a flexible online format that can work around your schedule. Visit cj.msu.edu to learn more.
Welcome, everybody, to the Crossing the Firewall podcast. I am Tom Holt. I'm a professor in the School of Criminal Justice here at Michigan State University. I'm also the director for the Center for Cybercrime Investigation and Training, and I'm here, as always, with my excellent co-hosts.
I'm Rachel McNealey. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Criminal Justice and an associate with the center.
Hi, I'm Dr. Taylor Fisher. I am a postdoc here at Michigan State University, and I, too, am an associate with the center.
And we, as always, are here to talk about issues related to cybercrime and cybersecurity, trying to hit on issues that maybe you're familiar with, maybe you're not, get you some familiarity with cybercrime topics that are relevant and are contemporary and are problems that have real impacts. Maybe you're aware of, maybe you're not. It's a good way to kind of get people oriented to different problems. And for this week, we have an excellent guest with us. He is a fantastic scholar out of Europe. His name is Rasmus Munksgaard, and he is a very good scholar who's been studying dark web markets for a long time. I was lucky enough to become familiar with his work in the mid-2010s, and it's just continued to be really impressive stuff. So we're going to talk to him a little bit about the way that illicit markets operate online. And in thinking about illicit markets, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when we talk about this?
I think it's eBay for criminals. That's usually how I think about it. With my experience on the darknet, I was always shocked at how professional some of these sites are. Right? You think that it's being run by these people who maybe aren't focused on web page development, but yet they really take the time to make them look official. And some of these markets, even though they're not legitimate, eBay or Amazon sites, they look a lot like them. So I think the professionalization of the dark web is very interesting to me.
I think the dark web, right, occupies so much space as this scary, wild west of the internet. And when I was at the University of Alabama, I did some work just trawling, and the amount of empty space that was there and kind of incomplete sites, it really doesn't back up this idea of, you walk in and it's just a virtual, kind of flea market of criminality. But I think it really is kind of a scary term to throw out there. But I think something that I'm really interested in is how much trust is involved in these marketplaces, right? You're trusting random anonymized users most of the time to ship you goods that are illegal, right, in a way that's safe and undetectable. And I think that's fascinating to me. But yeah, there's a lot going on there.
When I think of illicit markets, I think of all the media portrayals, whether it's Luther on Netflix, or there's an underground comic book series called Red Room that's all about these dark web murder rooms and the weirdos who go to them and populate them. I also think of a time when a family friend asked to go on the dark web because they'd never been and they really wanted to see it. And every time we were on it, they kept asking, "Are we going to get arrested for this?"
Yeah.
I was like, no, it's just fine, I promise. And then we left the next day, and I texted them and said, "Hey, just so you know, the police are going to be showing up at your house. Just remember to tell them I was showing you how to do this." And they just panicked, and it was excellent.
I would panic. That's terrible.
Well, they played into it, though. It's their fault for making it seem like, oh, God, what are we doing? It's like, this is perfectly legal. That's the one thing I always am amazed at, is that confusion of what's real, what's not, what's legal, what's not.
I was teaching a class recently, a guest lecture, and talking about the dark web, and I asked who in here has used the dark web, and some of them really shyly raised their hands. I was like, look, you're not admitting to anything illegal right now. I was like, I've been on it, and so they kind of put their hands up a little higher. But yeah, there's this scare factor that you're doing something wrong when you interact with it.
I think, too, along with the scare factor comes the confidence of using it, right? Like, it's a skill set. It's not like you can just Google your way to whatever you're looking for. And so learning how to get on the darknet and how to find sites kind of comes along with that. I'm not so scared of this anymore, right? I can use this. This is a tool that I can use. Now, whether you're using it for legitimate reasons, I can't promise, but certainly a skill.
Yeah. Well, good. Let's bring in our guests. Let's have Rasmus Munksgaard, who's an associate professor at Aalborg University in Denmark. It's great to have you on.
Thank you, Tom. Nice to meet you, Taylor and Rachel. Thank you, and kudos on the pronunciation, Tom. Very good, very good.
Thank you. I was trying very hard. So, how did you get interested in studying illicit markets to begin with?
That was sort of by coincidence. I was, must be more than 10 years ago, I had a class on social network analysis. I learned to code in R. After that, I kind of got into collecting data online, trying to mess around with it. And then one day for another class, I wrote a paper in which I'd like downloaded a bunch of data from a Reddit forum for people who are just starting to use cannabis. And they're like writing about how to learn how to smoke cannabis. And so I wrote a paper about that, and I thought I did some really cool graphs based on what people were talking about. And being young and I guess sort of like, impulsive, I tweeted it and tagged a professor at my old unit. Well, a professor who had given a really good lecture. And the next morning I woke up and I was like, this is silly, Rasmus, go delete the tweet. But instead he had written me, you should send me your CV. He invited me to come by for a chat. It was Jakob Demand, you might know him. And I came by for a chat with him. He was working at the Center for Drug and Alcohol Research. And Jakob, he asked me, did you know you can buy drugs online? And I was like, yeah, I think I read about that in Gawker magazine. And he was like, can you do the same thing with those websites? Can you go on them, like download the data and we can start to analyze it? I was like, I have no idea how to do that. But then I said, look, I'll try, give me a week. I'll do my very best. So I went home, sat down on a Friday, and I think I just started typing around, messing around. I was not a very good programmer, but after a weekend of hard work, a lot of Googling, a lot of Stack Overflow, I finally managed to do it. And that's how I got an internship there and started studying illicit markets on the dark web. So impulsivity and curiosity is what got me there.
So we've used the term the dark web a lot already. Can you clarify for our listeners or our viewers, if you're on the video feed, what exactly the dark web is?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. The good place to start off. So the concept dark web only emerges, I think, in the 2010s. But a while before that, there was an engineering paper, an informatics paper that was about, I can't remember the author. I mean, you can always include the show notes. But this, I think it was Bergman who wrote the paper in 2001. And the paper had like a simple hypothesis, a simple thesis, which was that most of the internet we see, what we find using search engines, he called the clear web. That's what you can find using a search engine. But there's also another layer of the web. There's all the other information out there. Information in chat rooms, information in the internal networks of your university department and so on. These are documents that you'll never find using a search engine. He labeled that the deep web. And somehow, and I don't know how, sometime in the 2010s, people start talking about the dark web as well. So there was a conflation between the deep and the dark web. Now, there's a really excellent scholar, Gale, who has a book about the dark web where he presents sort of the best, I think, distinction that we have. He says you have the clear, the deep, and the dark web. So the clear web, that's anything you can find using your standard search engine. The deep web is what's not indexed by search engine. So whatever web pages that the search engine hasn't seen ever. And then there's the dark web. And he says these are websites that you need special software to access. So, and we're primarily talking about the Tor, the onion router, which is an onion routing network, which means it's an anonymizing internet browser combined with sort of a network of computers. The thing is, inside of that network, you can hide your website. There's also similar ones. I think I2P used to be big, and I think there was another one whose name I forget. But these are sort of networks that you need specialized software to access. And so these would be the ones that he would define as the dark web. So you have the clear web, the indexed web, the deep web, the unindexed web, and then the dark web, which is the web that requires specialized software to access. So, but I think what's important here is that this is not sort of a normative distinction. We're not thinking about what's legitimate, what's illegitimate content. It's simply just what is content and how do you access it. Now, also, I think another important note here is to distinguish that Gale distinguishes between net and web, with the web being web pages written in HTML, whereas the net would be chat rooms, other protocols, IRC, perhaps Telegram, things like that. This distinction has been blurring a bit in recent years because more and more of our internet activity, in fact, takes place on apps rather than the old web that at least I grew up on, which is what I think this distinction originates around.
I think it's important here too to mention that we're talking about it in context of markets, but there's so much on the dark net, right? There's all this different, all these different platforms for communication, for sharing ideas, sharing content itself, to purchase content, and so we think about it, and I think kind of the public perception of it is that it's I'm going to go buy drugs off the dark net. But really, it's more about the connections. It's more about the networking that's going on amongst these people where, you're right, it's not always illicit in nature, but these people are looking for a place where they can network and talk about things outside of the public's eye. And so whether it be a forum, whether it be a market, whether it be, just a peer-to-peer sharing or these ridiculous red room, pages that may or may not be run by the FBI. So, there's all sorts of things that are, occurring in this darknet. And I think because of that diversity, we get this sort of clouded, is it good, is it bad? Because Facebook has an onion page, right? CNN has an onion page, New York Times. So it's just so diverse that blurring is really difficult to get at, both, normally and academically.
Mm-hmm.
So you've studied this issue for a long time. What do you think drives people to buy whatever they're interested in, although most of your work looks at drug markets? What do you think leads individuals to make purchases on drug markets online as opposed to in person?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think that was probably the first thing we started asking ourselves when we started researching in this field. So when I got into it, we're a bunch of different researchers around the world, all of us sort of starting to get our hands dirty, looking at this phenomenon, these drug markets on the dark web. And at least when we were studying it in Copenhagen, our initial question or our initial assumption was that people must be getting some really crazy stuff on there. But what we quickly found out was that people were buying regular drugs, the most popular drugs being the same ones that are popular if you do any survey among young people or, well, among anyone. It would be, cannabis first, MDMA, cocaine, amphetamines, etc. Yeah, there's variation across countries, but people were pretty much buying the same stuff. Next up, we thought it's probably people buying bulk, people buying huge quantities. Turns out that a lot of the purchases were actually just ridiculously small amounts, people ordering like 1 or 2 grams of cocaine, maybe for a weekend with their friends, smaller amounts of cannabis, and so on. So it seemed like a lot of it was recreational. It still does. That makes sense. Most drug transactions will be small recreational transactions, with a few ones being very large. But then the question is, why would someone do all of these things to go buy them online? Like you mentioned before, it's not easy getting into the dark web. You have to do a lot of digging. You have to figure out how to download Tor. You have to figure out how to use PGP encryption. We can talk about that later, but basically it's really difficult. It's really 90s technology, PGP encryption. So you need to sit there on your computer, encrypt your like address to a drug seller who will then send you the drugs. You need to go buy Bitcoin. So many obstacles when considering what people are doing is something you could just, if you're not too shy and you're really dedicated and you go out to a few different bars and ask the right people, you could probably achieve the same thing on a Friday or Saturday evening. So I think that was very puzzling. But so why would people then go online to buy drugs? Well, when we look at what people say, usually they'll refer to it as there's price might be a factor. Prices may be more competitive. interacting with drug sellers might also be nicer. People in the dark web tend to be more customer oriented. It also appears, although we still don't, I mean, all we have is we have people answering in surveys, saying that drugs are of high quality, but of course going out and doing like really large scale systematic tests comparing the quality of dark web and street corner cocaine isn't really possible. It might look like it's a tad bit better, but quality has also been mentioned. So price, quality, the way you conduct business, it might just be more attractive than your regular dealer. And then finally, back then it was kind of cool. It was kind of cyberpunk. You use anonymous digital currency. You log into a web page that looks out of this world. It was kind of cool. So I think that was probably also part of the charm. I know, looking at some of my own data, many people just do one purchase ever. At least if you look at some of the registries on one website. And so most of the purchases were just one person doing one purchase for their entire career. And that might just be, trying it out because it's kind of cool.
I think something that gets hidden a lot in talking about the dark web is its legitimate role in privacy, right? I know a lot of people see it as a way to browse the web without surveillance, right? Without having your data unwittingly collected. And I think it's the side of the coin that gets, painted over by the talk of scary criminality a lot. And, the dark web was used, I think it was Arab Spring, right, to coordinate protests against the government. So you have people using it for these really rebellious, legitimate, depending on whom you talk to, reasons. So is that something that came up a lot too, was just, I'm using this as a way to opt out of unwitting surveillance and big internet, kind of.
Yeah, one of the fascinating things about online drug markets, at least the ones we started studying back there in 2013, 2011, when they emerged. In 2011, Silk Road launches, and Silk Road becomes sort of the ideal type for these markets. It's the first one that's launched, the first time we really see this online drug trade. And what's kind of cool in this respect is that Silk Road was pretty much based on three technologies: Tor, onion routing, PGP encryption, and Bitcoin. And I would say all of those three are like extremely political technologies. There's so much political investment in them. Tor is specifically designed to circumvent censorship. It's been promoted, especially in countries where there's a lot of internet censorship. PGP is related to the whole crypto wars in the US in the 90s, in which government tried to regulate encryption technology. And Bitcoin, of course, it's built like sort of gold economics, the idea that, you can create currency without inflation, etc. So these are like really, really political technologies. And the person who built Silk Road, he just took these three very political technologies, put them together, and then created something new and novel out of it. But people were and it was interesting to see people use these very political tools that are often framed as political, in the service of something that was not that political, although it was a little bit political in the start.
I think it's interesting to, historically, it was developed by the Navy for military purposes. So when you think about the use of Tor, you may think illicit uses, but historically it was developed so that the military could communicate without that risk of it being intercepted. And then, of course, to not have only military, you have to open up to everyone. But it came from this idea that we need to have some kind of protection over our information being passed across the internet. And so I think that kind of question mark of the illicit use is really funny when you consider it was built by the military for the military.
That always blows people's minds when you tell them that.
So we've talked about a lot of different spaces online. Does every market operate the same? Like if I'm on the open web, is it effectively the same as what I see on the dark web, or are there demonstrable differences between the way that markets are structured?
Yes, I think that's a really good question, because we've seen a lot of change within the last decade or so. So in 2011, Silk Road launches, and it's sort of the first time we have online drug dealing in an organized manner. I mean, before that, there's stories about people sourcing stuff on Craigslist, etc. But this is the first time we have like large-scale drug economies online. So Silk Road launches. They do a bit of experimenting in the first couple of years. They tried out some novel ideas to handle the fact that Bitcoin was extremely volatile at that point, way more volatile than it is now, I think. But but in the end, it sort of settles on this way of functioning. There's sort of like this contract system. There's an administrator running the website. People pay a small commission to sell on it. Users can log in, etc. This basic design that they worked out sort of just persists. No one really innovates that much upon it, except the Russians, who do innovate a little bit on it. Instead of having drugs delivered in the mail, they do this sort of treasure hunt where you get a picture and some GPS coordinates, and then you have to go find it in a park or between like a fire hydrant or something cool. But it's still the same basic idea, except they just exchanged mail for sort of hide and seek.
I like that.
But then what we see in sort of the last, I think, 5 or 10 years is we start seeing more and more reports in news media, and then 1 or 2 years later, we see academics start writing about it. Is people start sourcing drugs on social media. So that really takes off. A lot of my colleagues here in Scandinavia did some really excellent research on that. We see people using different applications. In the start, it's Facebook, where they have Facebook groups. We can go in and find a seller. People start moving on to Snapchat. Then they start using Telegram as well. So it's been like a lot of proliferation in this area where people start to also sell drugs in more novel ways. And I think just to a large extent, at least here, what has happened is that it's replaced what used to be just these drug dealer phones, were delivery services, and then people start using Facebook instead of asking your friend for a number. If you don't have a friend with a number for a phone, you go on Facebook to find it. And then today, I think we start to see sort of the outline of something new, which is the role of recommendation algorithms. If you go on Facebook, at least that's how it works here. Denmark is very much a Facebook country. And it doesn't take a lot of searching around on Facebook until you find a group where people offer various illicit substances and other illicit goods. But as soon as you sort of sign up into that group, you get recommended a few other groups, because if you're interested in this group, you might also be interested in this one, obviously. I actually did like a little experiment recently where I downloaded Snapchat, and because I didn't have Snapchat before, and I just see that there's a bunch of drug dealers, it seems like, operating in my city, and I was like, wow, so the recommendation algorithm is just recommending that to you. And I really have to give a shout out to a PhD student at the University of Copenhagen, Christopher Olsen, who has been working on this and doing some really cool experiments on it. But I think we saw the crypto markets, then we started seeing social media, and now we might be seeing these algorithms and recommendation algorithms starting to play a larger role in sort of the discovery of sellers. So there is a lot of variation here.
I think that's so funny, because the linkage across apps and recommendations is surely very beneficial for legitimate businesses. That's a great feature. And so it's kind of been leveraged now for these illegitimate, illicit businesses, if you will. But so as the market has kind of shifted platforms, do really prominent sellers tend to keep the same monikers across platforms so that their buyers can be like, oh, this is my guy, he's just on Facebook now? Is that something that they do?
Yeah, so I think one of the interesting things about this economy, and one of the things that drew me into doing a PhD back when I did that, was the fact that illicit economies are usually like very trust-based. People trade with people they know. Trust is everything. But what do you do online? Because you can't really trust an anonymous person on the other side of the world. At least, how can you establish trust in that person? And we often talk about the dark web and talk about anonymity, but what's interesting is people are actually not that anonymous. Well, they are anonymous in the sense that their internet traffic is anonymous. This is a technological thing, but they operate using pseudonyms. So you'll have like legendary drug dealers. There used to be one called Vendor BBMC. I remember no one forgot his name. Pelican. These are like some of the drug dealers I remember because they were active on forums. Xanax King was another. There was like these almost legendary characters in this economy. So a name has a lot of capital in it. It's worth a lot. So at least we saw that in these dark web markets that. And this happened quite frequently, that the owners of a market would run off with all the money, or the market would be seized by law enforcement. But sellers were still in possession of their name. And oftentimes they also had, in fact, a PGP encryption key, which could demonstrate that this was them. So they would just move on to the next market, set up shop, and then we knew it was still Xanax King or Pelican or BBMC that was still here. So we definitely saw that. I think in these new social media markets, I think there is more of a balance between security and, say, discovery. And I think people tend to rotate phones or usernames more. At least I don't think that usernames are as popular as they are on the dark web. But that might also be related to the fact that some of these dark web drug dealers were actually quite significant. Some of them were really large-scale operations. I think most of the ones you'll see on social media markets will be smaller fish. There might be someone behind them. But the really big ones we saw on the dark web would be people who were like making millions a year. So really large-scale operations.
Do you think it's convenience or risk, or what would necessarily make someone say, I'm just going to use my dealer on Facebook or TikTok or whatever your preference is, as opposed to going onto the dark web?
Yes, that's a good question. Like, is it risk? Is it preference? Is it availability? To start with, it's a lot of hassle to go on the dark web and buy your things there. I think we as researchers, especially those of us who like tech and understand tech, I think we have this assumption that people will choose the least risky way of doing things, which would obviously mean that they would use the dark web because that's much more secure. But what we often find is that people need to get cocaine on a Friday. And they don't have time to wait for the mailman or to wait for the Bitcoin that they purchased online. So instead, going on an app to find someone might be just way easier. But I think there's also another aspect of this, which is that this is also how we do business today. There's a lot of small business. There's businesses that use social media. Social media is really important for shopping more and more, especially like algorithm-driven shopping. Whereas back when the dark web drug market started, Amazon was sort of where you would buy your products. I'm sure Amazon is still bigger than TikTok when it comes to selling things, but this is the way young people are buying things today. So I think it might also just be sort of, you ask yourself, how do I buy my soap? Well, I buy that from this independent soap maker on TikTok. How do I get my drugs? Well, probably someone on Snapchat can do the same thing for me. So it might be just the natural way to look for these substances.
It's just basic economics and marketing, right? But for drugs.
I was just going to say the same thing.
Very much.
Yeah. It's, from my work on the darknet, we specifically looked at how are these things being communicated through the ads. And I think that's one thing that I really didn't understand until I watched, it was on Netflix, Shiny Flakes, I think is the one, where it was this huge market that was built out. Really great documentary. I thought it was well done. And I learned a lot because there was so much to that marketing conversation, right? It's the way I communicate and the way I write these ads matters a lot because I can convey trust. I can convey that I'm just your normal person, right? I think one of the people that we saw a bunch was like Harley Quinn, right? It's something that you recognize, and I can picture somebody in there. And so building out that marketing perspective is just as important in these online markets as it is on Amazon or Facebook or in the real world. And so seeing how they communicate and seeing how that reputation is built through the communication patterns, I think is really fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think, I in one of my earlier papers, it's some years ago now, I was lucky enough to actually get the opportunity to talk with some of these dark web drug dealers. And it was utterly fascinating to talk with them, because why would you choose to set up shop here? How did you start setting up shop here? And they had different reasonings behind why they would choose to sell drugs on the dark web. Some would sort of stress the fact that this was a nicer way of doing business. I remember a guy saying that he didn't have to hang around with characters he didn't like. He thought that other people in this trade were they weren't really nice guys. So he preferred that he just only had to interact with them when he was sourcing his drugs, and then when he was reselling it, his customers were fine. They were nice people. Another guy was like, this was a way to have sort of his own independent business. He didn't like having a manager or a boss. And for others, it was the fact that they could sort of be businessmen or businesswomen. This was a place where you could be an entrepreneur, and you could try to do this drug business in a way that appealed to your own sensibilities and your own values. And one of those values might just be providing high quality substances with a very good very good delivery times and high level of customer services and all of that. So that might also just be an appeal for sellers, that this might be a nicer way of doing business than the old school way of drug dealing.
I remember reading reviews, and it would be like, arrived in a nice package, and just the way that they wrote it, you would have thought they bought a kiddie pool on Amazon, and it was like, I think they bought a bunch of heroin. But they really are evaluating the sellers, right, on these kind of basic principles of exchange that you would see elsewhere.
So you mentioned interviewing drug dealers. How do you go about doing research? What's your primary mode of getting into the spaces, and how do you like to do this?
That's a good question. I'm not very committed to one method or one theory. I tend to jump from one thing to the other quite quickly. I did a lot of research where we would use these little robots that would go onto the websites and collect data. Getting access to the websites was pretty easy. You start off and just start browsing them. Then we set the little robots to work. They would go into the websites. They would collect everything that they could see, dump it into spreadsheets, and then we could just do your regular quantitative data analysis. I also dabbled a bit in analyzing text collected from forums. I thought that was a very interesting way to analyze these places, because a lot of it was based around text. There was absurd amounts of text produced in these forums, so there was quite a lot of interesting things to find in these huge piles of text. I've also done a bit of qualitative research, mainly for a project in which we interviewed drug sellers, which was really, really fascinating. But I have to say my preference is just spreadsheets for some reason. So I tend to work using quantitative data, and most of my research has been using data that we scraped, as we call it, that we sort of collected using these little robots. It sounds more complicated than it is, but in reality, it's the same thing as going onto a website and sitting down with your little notepad and writing, this guy has 57 reviews, he's selling 1 gram of cocaine at this price, writing it down, going to the next page, writing that one down, and then putting it all into a spreadsheet. And all we did was just automate that process, and then we would have, a little more than a few hundred advertisements. We might have 10,000 or something.
So one question I have for you, because we've really talked about drugs so far, but the marketplace online is so varied, right? You can get carding stuff, you can get ransomware, you can get all sorts of things. But I think one thing that's coming through is this cybercrime as a service. And my question to you is, I've seen this sort of pattern where it's kind of equivalent to small businesses and Amazon, where you use Amazon to promote your product early on, but then eventually you're big enough you can kind of manage your own website, sell from your own page. Are you seeing that same trend happening with these markets, where some of these hacker service pages are very distinctly this team and this team only? And so how does that relationship work with the larger markets? Are they on both markets? Do they prefer to stay in their own lane? Is that product dependent? Like, that kind of question I really haven't seen a lot in.
Yes, I think there's two interesting questions here. One is sort of people diversifying and selling through different avenues. Another one is this convergence between the drug economy and the cybercrime economy. That one is really fascinating. That happened around in I think it's 2014 or 2015, which is when Silk Road was seized in 2013, and then the next couple of years there were these new markets emerging. And at one point, one of the largest ones, Evolution, was run by two guys who had been, or two women, we don't know because they got away, who had been doing like credit card fraud, running credit card fraud websites, and now they started a marketplace for drugs and cybercrime services. So then we started to see these economies converge, and people of usually two different economies that were quite distinct, with different people using them, different sellers, we would see them sort of converge. And so what we have today in these large platforms is we have people from all over. Now there are still some rules. There's always been like bans on certain types of illicit goods and services, but at least the cybercrime economy tends to overlap with the drug economy quite a lot on the dark web. And yeah, I think in many cases sellers tend not to restrict themselves to one platform. They might use multiple platforms, and they might, of course, when it's drug sellers, they might also have an offline operation as well. People will often take things off the website and just because at first when you've, for example, say you've established trust with someone, you've confirmed that you can trust them, well then it's quite easy to just start going off website and switching to, let's say, some mode of chat communication or simply just an email or whatever to conduct your business. So yeah, there's usually a drift. People don't stay in the same place or don't only stay at the same corner, let's say like that.
Do markets take a cut? I've never come across that. But do they take like a cut of the profits?
I mean,
yeah.
They do? Okay. I figured they would, but I also wondered...
Because why else would you start one? That seems
right,
like a lot of
well,
work.
that's kind of what I was thinking. I was like, what's in it for you as the platform manager? But they'd have to take cut. But then I wonder how that interacts with all the Bitcoin wallets and all that nonsense that comes with crypto.
Oh, yeah. Because this is... Yeah, so the Bitcoin, the wallets, the commissions, this is such an interesting aspect of these markets. So what happens is, say you're running a large online black market. Now, you're going to have people buying a lot of drugs. So what these markets have is they have these escrow systems, which is basically just means that the website is going to hold on to the money, and then when you get the drugs, they're going to release it to the seller. So that means that money is not just being transmitted through the website, they're actually being held on the website for a while. Now, you can't really go and invest them like you would if you were maybe a bank holding on to a lot of money. So what happened a few times would be that the people who are running the websites would just run off with all the money. That would be called an exit scam. So that was, of course, one way to make money if you're running one of these platforms. But in the day-to-day business, usually there would be a cut of like, I think, between 4 and 8% from every transaction. That's just the website's cut. That's the cost of doing business. So these websites could quickly become quite profitable. Some estimates would put these economies in the hundreds of millions. And of course, there's a very huge dark figure here. We're not catching well, we don't know how much we're catching, but there's a lot of unmeasured transactions. And so these websites would make quite substantial profits from these commissions.
Mm-hmm. I remember being on the forums at any time, right, that an admin took a while on a marketplace to respond. Something seemed weird. You'd start to see the threads like, okay,
Get out.
are we about to, be exit scammed? Did the feds take it over? And it was
Yeah.
like, they were all like prairie dogs, just like looking around waiting to find out. And sometimes it was like the admin had gone on vacation, just didn't tell anybody. And they're like, everything's fine. But then there were the people that was like, is it really them? Or did the feds seize their account and they're peachy? So it's this like paranoia embedded in this really high trust system. But I remember just like, oh, something's happening. And you see the threads pop up all over the place.
Yeah, the level of paranoia in this scene, I think people started growing immune to it, but in the start it was absurd. And the level of drama you would have where people would say, oh, I'm an insider, I actually have like to tell like the main admin is actually an FBI agent or something, and they're gonna exit scam soon. And this used to be a very dramatic scene. My impression is that it's less dramatic now. People have sort of grown accustomed to that this is just how business works. Sometimes someone takes all the money and runs. That's just how it works. And the drama is less intense. But it really used to be very much like, you all know how forum cultures work, when forums get really excited over one thing. Now imagine it's everyone's money on the line. They get even more excited. It used to be, yeah.
You've talked a little bit about law enforcement. We know that these markets get taken down regularly. So if they persist, what's the benefit long term for law enforcement intervention? Do you feel like there is a better method, or are we just going to always have the problem of illicit markets, and therefore it's always going to require some kind of takedown? What's your take on it all?
Yes, I think this is a really fascinating discussion. The problem of, sort of, let's say, drug enforcement in online drug markets. Sometimes there's a lot of, like, there's especially something that goes on when how we frame it. One framing of this would be, well, every time you seize one market, there's just going to be a new one tomorrow, or 6 months down the line, there's going to be a new market. But if you go and ask any police officer and you ask him, like, do you think if you arrest all the drug dealers that drug markets will disappear? And they'll be like, no, someone new is going to come along. Drug enforcement is not necessarily about ending all drug trade. It's usually about increasing price, reducing accessibility, etc., so that you reduce consumption and crime in the long term. So, but often we tend to think in this binary way when we think of online drug markets, that if you can't seize them all, if you can't close them down completely, then sort of drug enforcement has no sense. But this is how I think drug enforcement generally works. That illicit markets are always there, and what you can do is you can try to reduce them, you can try to control them, and reduce consumption. Now, what is really interesting about the ones on the dark web, I think, is that what we've seen these massive police operations. Silk Road 1, Silk Road 2, later on, Alpha Bay, which I believe was the biggest takedown and seizure of a market. And in fact, after that, law enforcement was also running another market. They had infiltrated and actually arrested the people running one called Hansa Marketplace. And then they watched all the sellers and buyers move over to that market. And they would literally be offering them, the sellers, to download malware and stuff. So these markets, in a sense, also provide a very unique opportunity for law enforcement to not only target one person, but target like entire ecosystems where there is a very high degree of sort of centralization. Everyone goes to the same place, and now you can actually tap in, you can infiltrate these systems. I think to come with and this is not exactly one of these markets, but we've had they've grown quite big in Europe. I think they're also relatively big in the US, these crypto phone networks, these phone networks that are literally only used by people who are relatively high up in the drug economy or other illicit economies. It's mainly drugs. I mean, we had the case, I think it was EncroChat, in which French police seized the servers and had access to everyone's phones. I think they netted about 6,500 arrests from that. Now that's monumental when you think of the scale. I can't imagine any police operation of that scale. So I think one of the paradoxical things about these markets is that we tend to think of them as ungovernable, unenforceable, etc. But then when push comes to shove, we see law enforcement actually be doing some quite impressive feats here when it comes to infiltrating and taking them down. But of course, you can't eradicate illicit markets completely. People continue to buy illicit substances and continue to demand them, and so some suppliers will emerge.
Mm-hmm. So if these markets are moving away from the centralized platforms like on the dark web and moving more to decentralized, scattered across apps, are those approaches that police have taken still relevant, or are we looking down the pike of having to really revamp everything they've used?
So that is a really good question, but this is also one thing that boggles my mind, something that I can't wrap my head around, which is the fact that it takes me 5 minutes to find a group where people are selling stolen goods. We have like this, for some reason in my country, we have like a lot of people selling stolen meat. They go to supermarkets, steal a lot of meat, and then they sell it. And they advertise it on social media. And I think it's utterly fascinating that inside these social networks, inside what we could call, let's call it the legitimate web, we have people, usually small timers, but like smaller fish, but they're doing a lot of illegal stuff. And it surprises me that platforms appear not to be taking that much responsibility here. It's relatively easy to find, and we haven't seen law enforcement to a very big extent exploiting this, it seems. But you do have the same pattern in a sense. You have people centralizing a lot of illegal activity in one or two platforms, perhaps. And while they're doing that, they're leaving behind large troves of data, evidence that can be used against them, but also at the same time a very good opportunity for wiretapping them or for monitoring them in the long term. And obviously, yes, you can use a lot of these apps in a secure way. You might use a VPN when you access them. You might even try and use Tor while doing it. But usually this is where, there's a lot of people who take shortcuts when it comes to that. So I think there's quite a lot of potential for both law enforcement as well as platforms themselves to regulate some of the illegal economies that are emerging on social media.
What do you think about the arrest of the operator of Telegram? Do you think that those are the kinds of efforts that we might have to see moving forward as a more common practice, or do you think it's still sort of the onesie twosie dealer level approach, or disrupting a forum kind of approach?
So I think the pressure that was put on Telegram was really interesting. Telegram had become and still is, but now they've taken some steps to reduce it. Probably one of the preferred platforms for people who wanted to advertise anything shady. They used to have this thing where you could find like public profiles near me, which obviously if you type that into any like small, mid-size or large city, you would find a lot of people offering illicit goods and services. They've sort of removed that option now. They've done a lot more regulation on how that sort of reduces, let's call it, discovery within the platform of new sellers. But the platform is still a place where sellers and buyers can communicate with each other. So yeah, I think that might be one way, exerting pressure on platforms, regulating them in this sense. Telegram was arguably the one that was always sort of skirting the line or being on the wrong side of the line here, because there's always been really shady stuff going on Telegram, whereas Facebook and Snapchat and others are more legitimate, so to say.
So what do you see as the role of AI into the future? Do you think AI is going to play any role in markets, or how do you see that as a factor moving forward?
Well, I definitely see that AI is creating, well, is being used for new services and new goods. So in Denmark, we've had cases of people selling illegal visual material, restricted content of different types, mainly exploitation material being sold. So you would have people who simply were running their image generating service, and then they would have like I think it was a Telegram channel where people could pay for this content. So we see sort of AI entrepreneurs in these markets. This is a new genre of illicit goods and services that are emerging. If we think more broadly, how might AI make an impact in these markets? I think, and for any independent business person, let's say you are a drug dealer and you need to have your spreadsheets in order and everything, and AI might improve efficiency there. There's a lot of registry, there's a lot of calculations and math you need to do at times. That might also be relevant. Yeah, and I think that's what I've seen as of when it comes to immediate uses. I don't think when it comes to sort of the organization of markets that AI or these language models will be playing a role now. Recommendation algorithms, of course, are playing a role, and they've done so for years. I remember, I mean, we found this out back when we started hearing about drug dealing on Facebook in Denmark. And at Copenhagen University, we tried finding some of these profiles. And as soon as we found one, we would be suggested another one, even though we hadn't friended that profile. We would just get our friend recommendations would be messed up for a week. So already back then, algorithms were sort of affecting this. So yeah, perhaps in increasing efficiency, new goods and services, and then through recommendation algorithms. I think those are some of the ways that AI might be influencing illicit online markets in general. But I'd love to, if you have any other observations from more the cybercrime corner, I'd love to hear what you're seeing.
I would say I certainly think AI is going to play a part in this sort of cyber as a service. I think we're going to start seeing more applications of AI and people that don't necessarily know how to set it up, but they know how to, adapt it to what they need. Kind of the way like ransomware is being treated right now, where it's like there's this product that exists because a programmer wrote it for me, and I know just enough to adapt it to make sure it goes to the right person. But other than that, AI I think is going to help not only create a lot of those situations, but help people adapt to those products better.
Yeah, I'm always amazed that there's Fraud GPT now and Worm GPT, these programs that are operating on a fee-for-service model to do things that, yes, it's different from perhaps what ChatGPT can do, but it's not so radically different that you couldn't maybe force it to work in the same way. So I wonder if AI is going to be a service for the very uninitiated or the very unskilled, and then for others it will just be a facilitator, a simplification resource, but not necessarily the hub that's going to drive everything until generative AI is really able to maximize its outcome. But
I have a good business idea now.
I'm scared.
Right? I'm thinking you build out this database of different ransomware services, different things that you would sell normally. You use AI to allow your customer to customize it. Right. I don't know. I'm in the wrong field. No, I'm just kidding.
The Costco of cybercrime.
Right? So, as we wrap up, one question for you. What we try to do here is, of course, get this to the broadest audience possible. So, from all the conversations we've had today, from all of your work in this area, what's the one kind of average thing that you think the person needs to take away from this? What is one thing that the average person can take away from this?
Yeah. What is something the average person can take away from this? I would say that illicit... Sorry?
I'm sorry, that you would want them to take away necessarily.
That I would want them to take away. Well, I think it's very easy to start thinking of this in techie terms, to start focusing on technology, to start being like, oh, PGP, Tor, Bitcoin, all of that. I think what we've seen is that illicit online markets have changed sort of in parallel with, let's call it, the legitimate web, which has also transitioned over the last decade or 2 decades. And we've seen illicit markets sort of change in parallel. Today, people are using recommendation algorithms in illicit markets. They used to do that. They also do that when doing social media shopping. They used to find things on Amazon. That's how the dark web drug market started to emerge. There's been sort of an evolution in parallel here. So when we tend to think of these markets as something, if we think of them as being too technical, I think we miss the fact that they mimic. There is sort of a degree of imitation, mimicry, or isomorphism, or whatever it is, where they tend to resemble what we're doing in the legitimate economy as well. If we leave that behind a little bit, the technology, and we instead focus on what is it people are using the technology to achieve, then I think it's much more easy to understand these illicit markets, how they emerge, and how people use them. It is, I have to say, it is quite surprising how accessible they are today. I do feel that I don't think they have ever seemed as accessible, at least illicit drug markets, as they do today, because it's so easy to find it on social media if you really want to go start looking for it. And I think that's what, most of the concern about drug enforcement is about young kids being able to acquire drugs that might be dangerous. And those are exactly the people using social media. So I do think that is quite a significant change. But all in all, I would say when it comes to understanding illicit markets, I would say put aside the technology for a while and just start to think about the similarities between the legitimate web. I think then it will make a lot more sense, and start thinking about what is it that regular businesses on the web and what is that regular consumers do. Probably the illicit economy is going to mimic a lot of that or imitate it in some way or another.
Yeah, I think. What's that?
I would say it's still human behavior at the end of the day.
Exactly.
It's still human behavior.
Yeah, that's one thing. It feels like no matter who we talk to, at the end of the day, we keep coming back to this idea that cybercrime is just crime. It's technology involved, but beyond that, it's just human behavior. And it's good to hear that that's still the case, even in an environment that is all technology driven. It's still just the human actor that's relevant. Well, this was great. We appreciate you coming on. This was excellent insights. I hope people picked up a lot from this. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Yeah. And thank you all for being with us. Thank you if you're watching us or if you're listening to us, thank you. Give us a like and a subscribe, or give us a review if you're listening to us on your favorite podcast catcher of choice. And we'll catch you the next time we cross the firewall. Thanks for listening to the Crossing the Firewall podcast. This is a production of the Center for Cybercrime Investigation and Training in the School of Criminal Justice at Michigan State University, produced by J.J. Thomas. The thoughts and opinions expressed are those of the hosts and the guests and do not necessarily reflect those of the university. If you have a comment or a question about the show, please email us at crossingthefirewall@gmail.com. Also, make sure that you follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn for more information. And if you're enjoying us on your favorite podcast app, please make sure that you like the show and leave us a review so that way everybody knows what we're up to. And if you're listening in on YouTube, make sure that you like us and subscribe so that way you're staying up to date on everything that is crossing the firewall.